Hello, everyone, and welcome back to ITW, International Telecoms Week 2021. We are delighted to be starting this next panel, part of our smart messaging track. And here I'm going to hand over to your moderator for this session as we discuss the Cyber Warrior's Guide to Secure Smart Messaging. Over to you.
Thanks very much. Hi everyone, my name is Nick Lane. I am the Chief Insight Analyst at Mobile Squared. We are a business messaging specialist covering all channels in the world of business messaging. And in our panel today, we have 5 experts who are here to talk about the impact of security as we move from SMS into a smart messaging world. So the 5 panelists, let me start by, if you could give yourself a brief introduction about yourself and your company, and just to tag on at the end, if you were to send a message containing a username and a password to an account holding $10 million, which messaging channel would you use and why? So Desh, let's start with you.
Hey, hi Nick. Hi everyone. Good to be on this panel. My name is Desh and I work with Comviva, heading their messaging business. And as Comviva, we are into messaging business for last 2 decades and in the full spectrum from CPaaS solutions to firewall security solutions, enabling the entire ecosystem, enterprises, aggregators, and telcos with the communication solution suite. In terms of the channel that I would prefer for sending a message, I would say I would go with the A2P SMS from a verified sender ID protected. Yeah, I'll still use the old A2P SMS as a key channel. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, Nicky.
Hello, everyone. This is Nicky Peshwani, and I am working as a Vice President for Carrier Business Voice and Messaging for Bankai Group. So a brief introduction about Bankai is we have been in this industry for more than 2 decades now. And it's a telecom investment group, which basically invests into telecom products, switching, billing, fintech services, along with interconnection with more than 150 global operators. And about the message that the channel that I would use to send that message would be A2P because of it is not based on data. At the same time, it is still, I think, one of the most secured way of communication while receiving OTPs. Yeah.
Okay, starting with the Nicky, Nicole theme. Nicole, over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. There's a lot of Nicks on this panel. So I'm Nicole Culver. I'm the Director of Product Marketing for our Communication API suite at Bandwidth. We are an enterprise-grade platform for communications APIs, as well as one of the leading providers for services for, I think, 11 out of 12 of the Gartner Magic Quadrant UCaaS providers. Primarily US-based, but we've recently expanded through an acquisition of Voxbone to international services, which is awesome. Very excited about that. And I have a former background at a cybersecurity company. So I think, and I might be the outlier here, I think based on what I know as an educated user, if I were to send $10 million via messaging and the access to that, I would probably do it via something like Signal, an encrypted messaging app. So, and despite that, I still very much support A2P SMS.
Thanks, Nicole. Ricardo, welcome.
Hey, good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure to be in ITW, even if it's virtually. So my name is Ricardo Martins. I'm Vice President for Global Messaging Sales at iBasis. And iBasis is a global operator with 25 years. We are celebrating this year 25 years. Specialize on let's say, voice services, mobile services, and more recently, over the last 3-4 years, on messaging. In terms of the channel, I would also select an SMS. I think is still ubiquitous, universal, and it's a trustworthy channel. So I would put my $10 million on SMS, A2P.
Okay, and lastly, Georgia, welcome. Oh, okay. Might have to edit that bit out. Okay, so thanks everyone, appreciate that. So Nicole, one outlier in Signal, that's interesting, we'll come on to that. I've got 8 questions that I'd like to go through with you over the next 40 minutes or so. The first one is obviously looking at the impact that the pandemic has had. Obviously, you know, let's get this out the way. From our perspective as a research analyst house, we've seen huge growth in A2P SMS traffic going from 2019 to 2020. That trend has continued to 2021 to such an extent that we believe that the industry is almost pretty much reset itself. You know, white traffic accounts for about 69% of all that traffic. So we're as much as white traffic continues to grow, grey traffic continues to grow too. So from your perspective, what do you think has changed as a result of the pandemic? So let's start with Ricardo.
So I think one big change from the pandemic was, I would mention, awareness of the potential of the messaging as a channel to get the enterprises communicating with the end users. And I think that was pretty much a mind change or a behavior change, because people were not going to the shops, because people were staying at home in confinement. You know, when we see the use cases explosion, especially on e-commerce, and also even in the vaccination communication by the health authorities, we see the power of SMS A2P as a channel, and the messaging as a way to bridge the need that exists on the market that, you know, enterprises communicate with end users. And that, I think, was pretty evident with the growth of messaging. It's true that some verticals like tourism and travels and these type of things were affected, and that therefore there was on those specific verticals a decrease, but globally we could see an increase, and especially motivated by new use cases and or I would say enhanced use cases that take use of the fact that people have a mobile phone, they are reachable all the time, and you know, at the same time SMS is still trustworthy.
Yes, I mean, just to add to that, Ricardo, I mean, what we've calculated is that less than 3% of all businesses are actually using A2P SMS now. So, you know, we're not saying that every business in the world has to use SMS and every business will have to use business messaging, but the fact remains that we haven't even, you know, this is a largely untapped opportunity. So, you know, given the digital transformation that's, I guess, been expedited because of what's happened over the last 18 months, more and more companies are turning to messaging. More and more companies are using messaging more. Nicole, what are you seeing from obviously in the US?
I think, you know, just the pandemic really highlighted that consumers are increasingly wanting to engage with businesses via SMS. They want a simple channel that's conversational to be able to have those interactions, but not necessarily have to pick up the phone. Doesn't mean, you know, the voice channel is dead, but there's an increasingly prevalent use case for, you know, starting with SMS and then transitioning to something else as a conversation might need to, or completely handling it all via SMS. I'm trying to think if there was anything else really highlighted. Honestly, the digital transformation of healthcare and other like really imperative services that have become more virtual, that and how much SMS can actually impact patient outcomes, that was a big eye opener for us as a company.
Okay, Nicky, what are you seeing because of the pandemic?
Okay. So basically, I mean, due to the pandemic, we have observed in India is SMS is one of the markets which all the small, you know, shopkeepers, all the retailers have started using, especially to market their products. And that has been the most safest way to communicate to their customers because of the pandemic. And it has increased. In fact, just to give you an example of the CoWIN app, which the government of India actually launched for the vaccination drive. So though it was an app which used to be, used on the smartphones to register yourself or you go online for the vaccination, the end result, I mean, sending out messages on OTP, I mean, vaccination information, messages of the link for your digital certificates, everything was being terminated via A2P messages. And there is a huge growth which we see being in the telecom fraternity on A2P side. As Nick rightly said, only 3 to 4% businesses are using A2P messaging right now to communicate to their customers. But we see that there is a lot of scope yet, and just proper, filtering and other detailing is required in order to, terminate the cons of the A2P messaging business for the operators.
Thank you. Desh, you've been sitting patiently. You must have had lots of thoughts in the last couple of minutes.
Yeah, I think what Ricardo and Nicole and Nikki said is pretty much I would agree. And to sum it up, I would say that pandemic has put the digitization on steroids, and every organization, every brand is looking at how do I bring in the subscribers or customer experience in every stage, whether it is upselling, cross-selling. They might not have thought, but I think what it has caused, this pandemic, is that every organization is thinking. So there are more use cases. And like Nikki said, there is a long tail of enterprises and brands which are also onboarded. So it is a mix of both. And even in India, example for, the rates have increased by almost 20-30% because of the DLT coming in, and still it has not impacted the volume. So that shows the importance of the channel, that even when the rates increase, the enterprises cannot go away from using SMS as a key channel.
Okay, so panelists, Desh has thrown down the gauntlet. Can you come up with a better phrase than digitization on steroids? Great phrase, but absolutely true. So, okay, so if we look at where we were from in terms of the security standpoint, what actually are the brands asking for? Because you go back 20 years and the telco sector was had this kind of 5 nines reliability, 99.999%. Where are we now in terms of messaging? Because obviously three of you said A2P SMS. Nicole, you said Signal. So you went OTT, everyone went traditional. So everyone's got a different view in terms of what is the safest channel. So what is it that we should be creating? What is it that we should be telling brands? And how do we move this forward so that brands are comfortable and trust messaging channels moving forward? Who would like to start with that one?
I mean, I'm happy to start as the outlier. I think
Go on, that outlier.
I did not mean to say that I don't think that SMS is less secure. It's extremely rare, right? That in that moment that I'd be sending a text message with the security information for an account for $10 million would be intercepted. It'd be a pretty interesting intersection of events for that to happen, at least to me. However, I did have a career formerly in marketing at a cybersecurity company. And I think just based on my user education, for me personally, if I'm sending that, I'm going to choose something where I think there's a little bit less risk. But ultimately, the ability for A2P SMS to be convenient and available, yeah, I think that it is a really reliable channel, and brands shouldn't, I don't think brands should not trust A2P SMS so much so as there's a human element of user education. What is possible, and how do you want to take those risks? It's very similar with HIPAA compliance in the US for healthcare and managing personal health information. And I'm sorry if I talk a lot about US healthcare right now. I'm sort of in that zone with research. But the government has sort of ruled it's the patient's choice what kind of risk they want to take for exposing themselves. In the same way, I think it's the user's choice. And 99% of the time, people are going to choose the easiest option, the easiest path, and that's A2P SMS. So I don't think we should be telling brands not to use it.
Are brands demanding though? Are they actually coming to you? Who wants to answer this? You know, and it's kind of asking what kind of security, because, you know, just looking at some prep for this session, it can go, you know, it's down to almost a very kind of subjective view here. So, you know, from a brand's perspective, what should they be looking for? What should they be asking for when they're, you know, maybe making that step into using messaging for the first time?
I can
I think, sorry, Ricardo, should I?
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So I think for any brand, when they're using a channel, the first thing they would look at, am I able to reach my 100% of my customers and then comes in a safe, secure way. So that's where, you know, SMS becomes the key channel. Now, when we are looking at whom do they reach out to, let's say most enterprises, they would be working at an entry point with an aggregator to say, okay, we want to, you know, that's, let's say, their supplier of the messaging channel, and they can demand a safe, secure channel to them. But the aggregator doesn't control the entire ecosystem where the message is going to flow, and there can be fraud on the way in many different paths. And the fraud is not necessarily happening on that path. While the aggregator can guarantee a safe, secure way from brand to the end subscriber, but the fraud is happening in some other channel using the brand's name, which the aggregator or the telco might not control. And that is where I think the brands are demanding, but maybe not to the right people. And it is a much bigger ecosystem problem where the aggregator or the telco might not be in a position to solve it in a standalone way. Just for starters, yeah.
Yeah, Ricardo.
No, I agree in the sense that I think there is a lack of education from the users. And there is part of the protection and the avoidance of fraud issues that can come from a better education from end users. But coming back to your question, I think, you know, mostly brands want to reach the customers, and they select SMS because it's ubiquitous, it's universal, and it has a return ratio or conversion ratio much higher than email or other sources. And the last point, I think it's also, the brands have in mind is that if it's SMS, it's using a mobile network. And by default, it's a reliable infrastructure and secure. And I think, you know, there is no safe, 100% safe channels. But I think the starting point of SMS is quite good. And I think as an ecosystem, and the work that organizations like MEF are doing is how do we improve? How do we mitigate the gaps that exist? But I think the starting point is quite good.
Okay, so I think you must be reading my mind, because my next question was looking at MEF's SMS sender ID protection registry. So, I mean, that's obviously a great development for the industry. Obviously, it's been only rolled out to a handful of markets so far, so it'd be great if something like that could become a kind of worldwide standard. But again, I mean, it comes back to something that you've all raised is the consumer education. So it's fine to say that, you know, you're getting a message via Google that's verified. You're getting something from RCS or RBM when that finally takes off that's verified, you know. But the issue is, from a consumer's perspective, what is verified? Who's telling the consumer what is a secure message or not? You know, and this is part of the problem. This is probably, you know, why phishing is potentially so successful, because the medium of messaging is so trusted. And so people will typically look at a message, see a link, go, oh, okay, and just click on it. And then they might regret their actions. But, you know, and this is kind of the point I guess I was making with what's the impact has the pandemic had, in that, you know, we've all mentioned around the healthcare about the vaccination program. And that is something that, you know, kind of the fraudsters, the rogue element out there really jumping on. So again, it's who should be educating the consumer? Nicky.
Okay.
And how should that happen? Because we can't send a message.
Okay. So basically, see, what I believe is educating the end customer is very difficult when it comes to the A2P messages, because they are the recipient, right? So instead of that, are actually all the telecom providers and our providers should focus more on the data filtering and scrubbing of the messages, and filtering it properly through the sender IDs, to the filtration, that it has to be big data and analytics involved in order to study real-time frauds and make decisions on the based of artificial intelligence. This is where the future is going to be, and this is where we have to understand that passing a message to the end customer, that which sender ID they have to remember, it's very difficult. It has to be on the firewall side where everything is being managed, because again, I don't see a way out to actually educate the end customer on how they are going to use it.
Interesting. So I mean, so if we can't educate the end customer, how so it's really then down on incumbent on the aggregator, on the operator, to make sure that they're providing a secure platform. But that's only in the traditional sense. What about in the OTT world? So we're looking at WhatsApp. I suppose given what's happened, WhatsApp business is on the march. If you look at the amount of small and micro businesses that are using the app in itself, that is just growing exponentially on a month-by-month basis. I think the number of medium-large enterprises using it isn't growing as rapidly outside countries other than I think Brazil and India, but it's coming. Nicole, you've mentioned Telegram. All these alternative channels are coming. So how do we ensure that they have a certain security level so that when brands feel like now is the time to use them, they are going to be a trusted channel for that brand to send any kind of communication? Desh, I'm going to pick on you.
So my view is that it's a combination of many different things which have to come together for an effective solution. While I definitely agree that for effective response from a telco to manage the clean pipe, they have to have a kind of a security firewall solution in-house. The registry system at a country level, if you were to do, I think that is definitely proven to be a great success. And it's very hard to implement, but if you do it, great. But education also is a very critical element, and you can't take it away. The largest bank in India, for example, last month, they had a fraud where a lot of KYC related messages going out to the subscriber, and SBI, which is the largest bank in India, they published on Twitter and on messages, etc., to stay away from that. Now, obviously, it is an expensive process to reach out, and how many would you reach, and it is definitely reactive, which means that damage is done to some extent. But you can't avoid it. You can't just rely on the fraud systems or the registry 100%. There are many means in which the fraudsters are trying to reach out, which so education also has to go in hand. Yeah.
What I find quite interesting is when there is a fraudulent SMS out there, I will get a notification on Facebook or via WhatsApp, which is, I don't know, is that ironic or not? I'm not sure. Ricardo, just come back to you. Obviously, you mentioned MEF. MEF are doing great stuff here around the sender ID protection registry. How can, kind of, as an industry, we kind of flesh that out more, develop that, and make sure that becomes an industry standard, a global standard? What needs to be done to, almost support the MEF in what they're doing?
Yeah, I agree with Nicky when he says that there's only a certain extent that the users can be educated, and then the mobile operators or the ecosystem, the aggregators, have to do their part. And I think the initiative of MEF, it falls under that category. We know that not all the operators have a firewall in place, and the code of conduct for SMS is not signed or is not being followed by everyone. And I think the initiatives of MEF, especially the sender ID registration that happened in UK, and I think we are coming now with Singapore as a new trial. I think it's really to share the experience and show the value of that initiative can bring to the market. And in these workshops that we are having now, in these sessions, and really spread the word, because I think, again, coming back to my initial idea, that the starting point in terms of privacy and security is better for SMS. Signal and others, they have other issues that we don't have on SMS, because SMS falls under mobile networks that are subject to.
You just frozen there, Ricardo, so we'll just move on. Nicole, okay, so obviously we're looking at initiatives from the MF, the UK and Ireland has been rolled out into Singapore. What about in the US and the 10 DLC program? We get asked questions about what's going on about that from a messaging standpoint. You're there. Tell us what is going on so that everyone's getting a 101 now of what's happening in the US.
Yeah, I think earlier you mentioned, gray routes versus white routes. And I think that in the US, there's been a massive initiative to move business traffic to a white route, right, off of gray routes, where the carriers can identify, okay, this is business messaging traffic. It needs to be filtered in such a way. And that started a couple of years ago. And I think Verizon was the first to roll it out in February of 2019. Maybe 2020. With the pandemic, time is just irrelevant. And I think that what we're seeing now with AT&T and T-Mobile's efforts to create the campaign registry, you'll hear me say TCR, that's just the acronym for the campaign registry, is a way for businesses to have brands registered and identified, then have their campaigns vetted and understood, that there are proper opt-in and opt-out practices, that there are either declared use cases or mixed use cases, in order to control the throughput, so that the businesses don't have access willy-nilly to be able to, for example, prior to this effort, buy hundreds of thousands of telephone numbers and send as many messages as they want and cycle through those numbers. That really creates an experience that doesn't build trust. So I think that the carrier's efforts to get traffic registered, businesses registered and understood that, hey, you have to have a campaign ID to pass this traffic. And if you don't, we're not going to send it. And also knowing, just from my own conversations, that the carriers look at what that, based on the registration through TCR and then the actual traffic, they kind of try to match it. And if they see that it's not legit, they are actually taking proactive actions to limit the businesses that are bad actors. So they can't send, even one message per second. They're limited to like 0.2 messages per second. So really, really limiting the ability for businesses to play in the space where, they are encouraged to do bad actions.
What's the response time though, in terms of being able to identify these kind of rogue elements? Because if you've got thousands of companies sending thousands of campaigns, being able to identify that quickly could sometimes take quite a lot of time.
I think that, so the original registration process, how it works, it's, through an algorithm, and they're looking at, does the brand itself have, litigations against it? Has it been reported for spam before? Can we identify if the brand is a large company, well-known, those kinds of things to help the brand be more vetted, if you will. That, I think, has helped a lot in the carriers understanding what needs to be looked at more urgently, right? So like prioritization of who's sending what and how to know when it's maybe a little nefarious.
Do you think this is still the kind of the hangover from the premium rate value-added services impact from a few years ago?
So maybe I think that at least from a US perspective, the carriers, their biggest priority is keeping the messaging inbox as like an intimate wanted channel. They want to protect that sanctity. And these registration processes aren't necessarily, while they might add cost to the medium of messaging, they aren't necessarily a value add so much as a cost of doing business.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. Just trying to move the conversation on. Ricardo, welcome back. Oh, he's gone again. Oh, we've lost Ricardo. Right, okay. Right, well, we try and get a live feedback to Ricardo. all broadcasters will try and do. We did a report looking at the impact of fraud with MEF, which is available via the MEF website. And it's really looking at what is the biggest impact on monetization via fraud messaging for an operator. And grey routes, off-net routes, etc., were one of the biggest. SIM farms was also the second biggest. In terms of what you guys are seeing in terms of fraudulent traffic this year and the threats, what are you seeing in your various markets that the industry should be wary of, and where do you think that's going to head over the next 12 months? So Desh, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I think grey route blocking, as you know, has been pretty consistent in terms of, you know, the gray message. As long as the network is protected and you're blocking all the possible gray routes, it works, and you know, the gray message drops. And as soon as there is leakage, obviously it is going to increase. So the kind of messages and the kind of brands, like I said earlier, that which are now coming onto A2P channel and starting to increase, you need more intelligence to be able to catch them. That continues to evolve. For example, and it's very local to every country in terms of the kind of messages which are coming in. For example, in Africa, there is a lot of transactions which happen over mobile money for transactions, and that's the main medium for financial transactions, right, over USSD, and a lot of transactions end up happening on SMS as a channel in the end. So there is a lot of localization there to be able to catch that and have that local intelligence to be able to manage the fraud systems there. All the fraud, all the gray happens around that area. While in, you know, other markets, it's you know, could be mostly the international, the usual suspects around Facebook, Google's, etc. But yeah, so it will continue to evolve. But it is, I think, in last 4 or 5 years, we have seen the gray route part is pretty consistent. The fraud is where I see a much bigger challenge, right? Non-monetization related is a much bigger challenge for telcos to tackle.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Nicky, just coming back to something that you said and tying in with what Desh has just said. So from our research, you know, we've just finished a big 10-month project looking at all things business messaging to update our numbers. And we about 58% of operators, so 425 operators, have an actively deployed functional SMS firewall. So, you know, that's 58%. So 42% still don't have a firewall. But I think what was interesting from the research that we did with MEF is that operators accept about 5% of total traffic to be fraudulent. That's an acceptable level from an MNO's perspective. Now, I guess the issue there is that you don't know what that 5% of fraudulent traffic will actually be. So, you know, it only takes, you know, a big phishing campaign, and all of a sudden the brand, you know, the customer loyalty could be gone. There could be a huge media outcry around this operator, yeah, and all of a sudden the trust is gone. So, you know, what should an operator be trying to achieve? Should it, and you know, do you think 100% white route traffic over an operator, is that ever achievable?
Okay, so I think it is achievable. I mean, provided if all the steps that have been are being taken in accordance with not only the fraud management system, but also the pricing structure. Because what we have noticed in this last couple of years, many operators have actually, in fact, increased the prices per SMS from like 1 cent to 7 cents, 8 cents. So what they are actually doing here is they are motivating the gray, the gray routes where people want to use, gray suppliers and make more money, especially the aggregators and especially low cost, people who are running their campaigns. So it has to be affordable because SMS is an effective way of communicating with your customers, but it has to be affordable. And at the same time, as I said earlier, that we need to have proper, firewall, yes, 58% operators do have firewall, but at the same time, those firewall might not have, the functionalities, and 75%, I read in the report that they still say they need some scalability in the firewalls as well. They want to change certain things where the firewalls can learn by themselves, what are the frauds, what are the phishing attacks they are getting, because fraudsters are, quite smart. They are actually changing the way the phishing is done through links and through different sender IDs. So yes, a combination of both, if it works out fine, I think it is achievable.
You mentioned earlier that AI and machine learning
Yeah.
are obviously coming into play here. Do you think the application of that in the firewall is that, you know, almost critical now?
Yes, I mean it is critical because if we are able to manage automized learning and artificial learning basically, and with the help of the data that is being accumulated on the firewall, I mean every day different kind of tricks can be learned and implemented in other countries, so that we are actually stopping the frauds before it is being merged. Because what happens is, let's say if there is a phishing activity happening in the Indian market, and if it is successful, those activities get repeated in other markets as well. So if we are well in advanced, putting in softwares which can learn by themselves, and with the help of the data, we can stop it from happening in other countries as well, in the other markets.
Sure. Okay. Ricardo, you're back. Welcome. We lost you for a while there. Can you hear me okay? Here he is. Hello.
Hey, Murphy Law, right?
Right, while you're here, we'll try and get a quick question into you then. So from where we are today, moving forward, what do you think are going to be the biggest threats to the industry, and what should be done that isn't being done to kind of counter them?
I think the topic we are talking about, it's definitely about the trust in the channel, the security, the reliability that we are exchanging information in a safe way is really the major threat, because the fact that digital acceleration is bringing more and more enterprises and use cases into the messaging channel, it's bringing this point forward. And I think it was quite interesting I think you were mentioning that, on the survey, 5%, or the operators are okay with 5% fraud. And I think that's quite curious. My understanding is that they are talking on a monetization perspective, and not necessarily on the fraud perspective, on the fraud security perspective, because I don't think any mobile operator is fine with a threat of 5%. I think they are mostly referring to the monetization part of the firewall and the SMS A2P, where if they are monetizing much more, they are comfortable of some sort of linkage. But I think the security is really the major change, because the consumers will want to be 100% sure that whatever the data privacy, these are all challenges that we will have to face together as an ecosystem.
Okay. One thing we haven't touched on much yet is obviously RCS and RCS business messaging. What lessons do you think can be learned from A2P SMS and should be applied to RCS and RBM if they haven't already?
I think interoperability is key, and I think let's say the success of SMS comes from the fact that you can reach everyone everywhere. And I think over these years, RCS and other channels should have learned this lesson, and I think this is the major uptake from the SMS channel. Yes, maybe SMS doesn't have the same functionalities, it's not rich, it's not so interactive, but it's ubiquitous on its reach, and it's fully interoperative.
So I guess the fact you now have Google and you have the Open RCS forum. So in theory, it's not a fully interoperable platform. You've obviously got Samsung that's typically moved over and sided with Google. So you're going to have kind of different pockets of RCS interoperability, but that, I guess, from a P2P side, on a business messaging side, should that affect how, as an industry, we go and sell RCS to businesses and also kind of present the security aspect?
In my opinion, yes, because let's say a brand wants to reach the consumers, and if only 30% can receive an RCS and the rest has to fall back to SMS A2P, is not rich as an experience. And maybe the benefits that the brand can retain from using RCS are mitigated. So I think it's an issue that should be addressed.
Okay. Desh, you're going to say something.
Yeah, so I was saying that definitely from a acceptability of the channel, it's a big issue. And, only enterprises would really come in to accept RCS when that happens. But from a security point of view, what are the lessons? Like what we are doing in the A2P industry today in terms of registration and providing, analyzing data, content, etc. I think those should be put in place first in terms of how strong is the registration process and the brand's information, verified RCS, etc. I mean, these are in place, but I think the control mechanism on ground has to be very strong for this channel to be trusted as a secure channel. Yeah.
Okay. Nicole, in terms of what you're seeing in the US on RCS, I mean, you mentioned at the start looking at Signal as a very secure channel. Do you think that RCS can in any way kind of replicate that at all or not?
I mean, it would be great if it did. There was a lot of talk for a long time of them not actually employing the RCS's ability to use encryption. And I think that would be a mistake if they are going to move forward with RCS and have it be, a more sanctified channel in that sense. Then the encryption is key. No pun intended. The lesson, I did want to touch on the lesson learned from SMS and the interoperability that Ricardo touched on. The carriers, we've relied on the network operators and the carriers to really push that interoperability for SMS. And while I think that is valid, a lesson we can learn is we also now in this day and age need the big technical companies of the world, the Googles, the Samsungs, the Apples, to work on that interoperability as well and have a hand in it. They're too large now to ignore. And I think that, the real success factor of SMS is that it's device agnostic. And for businesses, even though we're focused on business messaging, a business doesn't want to have to worry about whether or not their user is using one device or another. They just want to be able to get the message delivered. And there are other things to consider, users that don't have smartphones, things like that. So I think that the lesson learned there is making sure that RCS, if that becomes the main, more sanctified channel, it is just as ubiquitous as SMS, but with encryption.
Yeah. Okay. So just lastly, I realize we're running out of time. So one of the things that, again, we've also identified over the last year is a huge increase in one-time passwords and 2FA. A lot of businesses now, a lot of banks, for example, are also using 2FA in particular and OTP more 2FA. When you're sending an inquiry, you then obviously get your SMS with your code, which you obviously input. So more and more companies have turned to that in the last 12 months. Is that likely to continue, or are you going to start to see brands start to develop their own app-based notification platform? Because obviously Microsoft has moved to its own kind of authenticator app, but as yet that seems to be the only major kind of behemoth that's done it. Everyone else seems to be staying on A2P SMS. Do you think that's sustainable, or do you think there will be alternative channels emerging over the next couple of years? Desh, let's start with you.
Yeah. So Nick, in terms of the enterprises attempting alternate channels, including apps, emails, etc., it has always been there. But the cost of missing, let's say, an appointment or any other use case, for example, missing a financial transaction for lack of user not being able to, let's say, open an app, it's much higher than paying the SMS cost. And if you look at that cost, I think businesses will continue to attempt these alternate channels. But until you have a ubiquitous channel or a way where you are able to fall back onto various channels and really optimize cost, I don't think A2P SMS is going to go away very soon.
Okay, anyone else? What about, what about Facebook? I mean, if Facebook can create their own service, that could potentially fundamentally change the way that a lot of companies look at how they use A2P SMS for 2FA, for example? Are they likely to create something? Because I know they've threatened it, and they've been
Yes.
threatening it for a long time, but it hasn't come yet. So, anyway, who would like to answer? Who would like to talk about Facebook?
I mean, I'll jump in there and just say, Facebook is pretty polarizing, at least in the US. I know plenty of people who don't have it. So again, Facebook can create an app, but then that still limits the people who don't trust Facebook, don't believe in it, don't use it. I think that SMS isn't going anywhere as far as authentication goes, just because of the fact that it's understood, right? It is very easy to use. It's widely understood. There's no extra step that needs to be had. You don't have to download an app or learn how to use it. Even I'm used to protocols where you have to use a security key or some other sort of authenticator app. And I can't imagine probably 50% of the people I know being able to do that on the regular. So I don't think SMS is going anywhere, even with Facebook creating something new.
What about WhatsApp? Nicky or Ricardo, haven't asked you for a few minutes. What kind of impact could WhatsApp potentially have on this?
Let's say I tend to agree with Nicole when she says that SMS is there to stay in the sense it is easy to use, and we know that it's ubiquitous, blah blah blah. But I think also the mobile networks and the ecosystem has to understand that the growing of the rates and the increase of the costs globally to terminate an A2P message on a mobile network is actually pushing for these alternatives. So I think it's a combination of smart pricing that the mobile operators or the ecosystem that is around the SMS A2P channel has to protect the channel, because it cannot be overpriced. Otherwise, we also risk again pushing it for another alternative that might not be so let's say successful in terms of reach, easiness, but there is a limit, a threshold of cost that also has to be taken into account. And I think that factor, the mobile operators or the mobile networks should be paying attention to that. If we do it properly, then I think this is can be years to stay, I think.
Yeah, Nicky, in India, we've seen numbers for WhatsApp Business go through the roof. What kind of impact is that having on SMS from what you're saying?
Okay, so what I will say is it will actually, we have to differentiate here when we talk about some applications who are using their own notifications, like Microsoft or some of the credit card companies as well. So on the banking side, I don't see A2P SMS going away. Even if WhatsApp for Business comes in, the A2P will remain on the financial transactions for all the application companies at the end service to talk to the customers. But when we talk about some of the applications like Microsoft, some new channels, some news apps, yes, notifications are increasing. And again, Ricardo was right. One of the biggest reasons maybe because of the cost, the price increasing, which is actually demotivating the companies to try and build their own app that they can provide with notifications to customer and learn, gather data, what is the behavior of the customer and everything else. So yes, I mean, we have to differentiate, especially when we're talking about in the Indian market here.
Okay. So I think we've run out of time now. Now let's all assume that you've got an audience of millions of people. We've already addressed the $10 million question. So just to end with, and let's start with you, Desh. What is your one overriding message that you want to leave with the audience?
So the key message for regulators and telcos would be that implementing a registry system to be able to register the sender IDs so that the SMS continues to be a trusted channel is going to be one of the key initiatives, and to all the telcos to also implement a firewall solution to keep the network secure. I think these two measures are very critical to keep the value of A2P SMS going and be trusted channel in future. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Nicky?
Yes, I agree with Desher. As the registry, the filtration, and the SMS firewall part is very important for the all the MNOs, and they have to keep on upgrading because the scamsters are going to keep on upgrading themselves. So we have to be fast and we have to be smarter than them in order to understand and implement it in other markets before they get it.
Okay, Ricardo.
Yeah, as the problem is complex, the solution has to be creative. I think we have to use all these tools that are in arranged. As Nicky and Dish said, operators should have a firewall, and then we should have the code of conduct. We should have the MEF initiatives of sender registration, and we should also push that for more businesses use the channel, because if there's still a potential growth in terms of the total business users, I think we should really attract more businesses to the market, to the SMS A2P channel, or to the messaging channel, as you want to say. That would be my take.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, Nicole.
Yeah, I mean, I echo all of that, but I would say that, per Ricardo's creative problem requires a creative solution. We can't just rely on the MNOs, firewalls, and upgrading and moving fast enough. This is a problem that requires collaboration between not just the MNOs, but the major tech organizations that are creating the mobile devices. And then also the human element has to be considered, right? We, as in our nature, want to take SMS. It's so easy, it's so available. So we need to sort of be considered in that, and businesses, just like Ricardo said, should continue to use SMS. But it would be great if we could see some more interoperability and collaboration with tech and operators globally.
Brilliant. And just from our perspective, our view was that we were expecting A2P SMS to peak in 2022 and then start to decline as other channels came in. We've completely changed that view now. We expect it to grow exponentially, and this is just the beginning. So whereas operators were probably looking to kind of limit any potential investment in SMSCs or whatever, that's changed. Same with SMS firewalls. That investment is just going to increase now because there's going to be more and more money coming into this sector. So, from our view, this is just the beginning. So, guys, thanks very much. It's been a fascinating hour. I appreciate your time. I'll pass you back to Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nick, for leading such a fantastic discussion, and for everyone in joining. A reminder that this session is available for 30 days after this recording, so you can watch it on demand and share it with colleagues, etc. I would also like to take a minute before we close to just thank our sponsors for making ITW 2021 possible. And thank you all again, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank
Nick.
you. It was a pleasure.